And so I'll obviously afterwards I'll edit it, take some of the bits out, and then if
Yeah.
you or I refer to anything, I can bring in images, very easily. And it'll kind of look like this when we've got an image will appear like that, and then it'll go away
Okay.
again. So it all looks really professional. I can also during the conversation or afterwards, I can do this, at the bottom
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
screen. So there's loads of stuff we can do that makes it look professional. But it's really about the conversation, to be honest,
Okay.
Ashok.
Great.
And just make sure I'm saying your second name right. Is it Jansari?
Jansari, yeah.
Jansari, yes.
Yeah.
I said to my mother half today, I said, "Oh, I'm interviewing Ashok Jansari," and she said, "Are you sure that's how you say it?" So
Oh, bless her.
yeah, so I thought I better say it. So
Well, the talk I just gave, I was introduced as Dr. Ashok Ansari or Yansari, and I didn't correct her. It was
yeah.
fine, but it's okay.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, I get it myself with it depends where I'm speaking, because MacArthur in Gaelic is Macairta.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so even then, if I'm talking in Scotland, I quite often get Macairta, which is quite nice. So I quite like
Oh,
the differences. Okay, you ready? You ready to start
yeah.
chatting?
Yeah.
Okay. So hi, my name's Scott MacArthur, and I'm joined today by a friend of mine who has just written a book, and it's about to be published. I'm joined by Dr. Ashok Jansari. Ashok, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me, Scott.
It's really nice to see you. And I think this is only the second time we've done something like this, isn't it? I think it is.
Yeah,
Maybe
I think
third.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've just written a book and had it
Yeah.
published, or about to have it published.
It's coming. It's hitting the shelves in 18 days' time.
Very good. Oh, that must be exciting.
Well, after 15 years of gestation, it's been a long labour.
15 years.
15 years since I signed the contract, yes.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what's the book called, if you don't mind me asking? Is it a
It's
secret at
called
the moment?
a student's guide to cognitive neuropsychology.
Oh, I bet you it doesn't have any neurobollocks in it.
No, but it's got a section on what about being careful about the neurobollocks. Yes,
Right. Okay.
how to avoid
So
the neurobollocks.
it's a topic I know we're both quite close to, and it gets
Yes.
so frustrating, doesn't it? It's so
Yeah.
frustrating. And we'll come back to that. So I'm really interested, as you know, I love stories, and I love to ask people about their story. So can we go back before the book
Yeah.
and just give us a little bit about how you got to become who you are now and got the offer to write a book? It ended up, you're going to publish an important book on neurobiology. So take me back, give me the life story, because I actually don't know it, Ashok, to be honest. I don't know it, so I'm interested.
Well, I'm happy to tell you, and it's quite
Yeah.
quite a strange meandering story, and which I think hopefully makes it a bit more rather interesting. I'm the first person in my family to go to university, so I didn't really know what this thing called university was, and I managed to get into King's College, Cambridge, which was rather amazing. My school wasn't used to sending people to university, let alone Cambridge, so it was a strange experience. But I ended up in this amazing place, not Cambridge, but King's, which is just the most stunning, supportive place I've ever been in. But I was studying something called natural sciences. And the reason for that is because no one in my family had a profession, and I didn't know about engineering, medicine, law, etc. So I effectively did this thing, which was a continuation of my A levels, which is maths, physics, chemistry, and this thing called physiology. And I didn't like it very much, or rather, I found it really difficult. Thought I was useless. Thought maybe it's just because I don't belong in this university, etc. So I kind of tried to leave, and my college said, "You're not leaving."
Right.
And I thought, "Damn." So I had to continue with this natural sciences. But the amazing thing about Cambridge is that the tripos system is such that it allows you to move after finishing 1 year into something else.
All right.
And so I could have changed to law, medicine, various other things if I wanted to, as long as I was okay in the first year. So what I found out is that a number of my friends were going to be changing to law after the first year. And there's a course during the summer vacation period, which is like a truncated
Okay.
bit of the first year course that allows people who haven't done the first year of law to move into the second year of law.
Right.
And so a bunch of my friends were doing this. And given that I decided I wasn't going to be a chemist or a physicist or a physiologist, I thought I'll try this law thing, mainly because I'm a good sheep. I was following what my friends were doing. I even jumped out of a plane with those same three friends for charity for a parachute jump. So I thought I'll follow them in this as well. So I
Yes.
started doing this law course, which was 3 weeks long during the summer holidays. And it's a beautiful time to be in Cambridge.
Mm.
But I realized after the first day, there was no way I was going to be a lawyer. It was way too subjective. And I thought, what is this?
Yeah.
So I finished this course, but not really doing it. And I can't even remember why, but I went back to my director of studies from for natural sciences, and I said to him, "Well, Dickie, I didn't really like the law thing." And he said, "Do you want to come back to the sciences?" I said, "Will you let me?" And he said, "Of course I will." And he said, "I know which bits of science you didn't like, so how about trying experimental psychology? It's science but about people."
Yes.
And I'm not kidding, I didn't know what that meant. My first thought was, oh, not that Freud rubbish. Because,
Yes, exactly.
like most people, I assumed that psychology was analyzing people and all
Yeah.
that, not that Freud rubbish. So then I thought, um, well, I've burnt many bridges here, so maybe I will do this Freud rubbish, and
Mhm.
then I will become an accountant because I'd heard of that profession at least.
Yes.
So I went into this experimental psychology log without a clue what it was.
Right.
First lecture of my second year in October 1987 was what experimental psychology was. And by
Mm.
the end of it, I knew one thing: Freud hadn't been mentioned. So it
Yeah.
wasn't that Freud stuff.
Hurrah.
But other than that, I didn't know what it was. Second lecture was about brain damage.
Mm.
This is called cognitive neuropsychology. I didn't know what cognitive meant or what neuropsychology meant. So I went there thinking, well, it says it's about brain damage. So I assumed it was a lecture about people in hospital beds with tubes coming out of their heads and who were comatose and whatever.
Yeah.
And this woman bounded onto stage and gave us this stunning lecture about people who could tell you what happened 20 years ago, but not what happened 20 minutes ago, the
Right.
reverse of what you expect. Or people who would see this little furry creature that said meow and they wouldn't know what that was, but they'd be able to describe a helicopter to you. And I thought, what the hell?
Yeah.
And I can date my love affair with neuropsychology to the second week, to the first week in October, to that lecture during my second year. And the person giving the lecture was called Dr. Rosalind McCarthy. She'd just come up from London, where she'd worked with one of the doyens of world neuropsychology, Professor Elizabeth Warrington at the National Hospital in London.
Mhm.
And she'd done amazing work with Elizabeth Warrington, and now she was a lecturer in Cambridge. So I did my second year doing some of this experimental psychology, along with history and philosophy of science and physiology. And weirdly, that combination proved a really good combination. It was an accidental combination, but
Yes.
learning the history and philosophy of science was really useful for understanding what science is, the fact that there's no such thing as proof, how we develop ideas, what Kuhnian paradigm shifts are, and how we change our thinking. You know, when a method has become too weighty, etc. And then in my final year, I specialized only in experimental psychology, and I did my final year dissertation with Ros McCarthy on a patient with memory problems, and that's where the love affair started. And
Ah.
then I did a PhD. Then I went to the States to do a postdoc with a very important neuroscientist called Antonio Damasio. So that's how I got into the field, and then developed my own kind of research program.
Yeah.
And then what happened about 15 years ago is that I was talking at a conference to one of the booksellers that was there, one of the publishers who brought their journals and their books along. And I was just chatting to this guy who maybe I'd met a couple of times before. And he said, and it was about this book by two of the gods of the field that I'd used as an undergraduate. And he said that there wasn't going to be another edition of it because it was quite outdated by then.
Right.
And he said, and he started talking to me, and he said, "Would you consider writing a book?" And I thought, "Me? What do you mean?" And he said, "No, we're looking for an author." And so I started chatting to him, and then weirdly, another publisher came to me and asked me the same thing, and I mentioned it to a friend of mine, and she said, "Oh my God, my husband, he's the person with Sage, and I think they'd really like you." And suddenly I was being headhunted by 3 different
Wow.
publishers, and that's how this came about 15, 16 years ago.
But it started 15 years ago. I mean, what have you been doing for the last 15 years?
Twiddling my thumbs.
I don't believe that for a minute.
And, well, the actual truth is that most of the time, and I think maybe your viewers will probably want to hear this, is that I was dealing with periods of self-doubt, which I think is such a big part of the writing process, especially for the first big one. Especially, I mean, I hadn't started at the easy end, let's say, because I'd started, my first book was going to be on the whole of the brain.
Yes.
And it's impossible to specialize in the whole of the brain. So I'd taken on, I thought, way too much. And my own kind of lack of self-confidence about various things made me always think about that devil sitting on my shoulder thinking, who do you think you are? And I would think, okay, so I know a bit about memory and a bit about face recognition, which are areas that I work in, but I don't know anything about language and even about some of those other fields. I'm not the number one person. And so what if that number one person reads this book? They'll be thinking, what do you mean? Who do you think you are writing? And so that voice was the one that was constantly going around in my head, making me doubt myself. So it was a very stop start thing, which meant that it took 15 years. I mean, in the end, if you add up the amount of time it took, I'd say about 2 years.
Right. Okay. So there's a few interesting things there that I'd like to just explore a little bit further. The self-doubt part, I understand that, and I think that's why I've had aborted attempts myself with a deal I got from Bloomsbury. But I think the complexity issue is what, I mean, we've spoken about this over a beer before, but I'd like to talk to you about it again, because there's almost like, now this isn't scientific, but there's almost a correlation between how little we know about a subject and the number of books that are published. And it's an inverse relationship. We know virtually nothing about the brain, but there are thousands of books being written about it. Now that just puts a red light off in my head. You know, it's like, so how do you approach, because you know what I'm getting at here, there's a lot of nonsense. Publishers are producing so much nonsense from people who do not know the slightest thing about the brain. But you do know a bit about the brain. But so how do you feel about all of this? I mean, have you got a view on it? I'm sure you've got a view on it. It's a mess, isn't it? Is it a mess? Is that a way to describe it?
I think it is, and I think it's a sign of the times we live in terms of knowledge has to be created. I mean, otherwise, why would we have knowledge institutions? So people are always coming out with things that they want to say, but that doesn't mean that it's good stuff. I remember hearing about a new journal, and I thought, do we really need another neuropsychology journal? But of course, it's because this particular publisher didn't have a neuropsychology journal in their suite. So it's about each of them trying to cover all of their bases. And of course, each of them tries to come across as if they've got a new take on things, or their journal or their book or whatever is going to be better. Which one can understand, but at some level, I think it's a bit crazy. I mean, you know, how many trees are we going to kill for more books, or how many more websites are we going to create that take up, cloud storage space, etc., to say the same things? I think that's the thing that I find most worrying about it. It's saying the same things, but just in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, that was one of my concerns. Am I just going to be saying what everyone else has said so that these publishers can say, now we've got a neuropsychology book? So I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the things when one is, if one wants to be true and have integrity,
Yeah.
are you actually saying something that hasn't already been said?
Right. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, I think my experience of working with the brain is at a completely different level to you. I was just down in the pits. I was doing morphology of
Yeah.
the brain, but that was really difficult.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, and I can't imagine, people saying, oh, I under all this left and right nonsense and all
Yeah.
the complete garbage that's in the media. And
Yeah.
I remember dissecting a brain is quite not too difficult, but actually studying it, just the morphology, just the structure of it.
Yeah.
Bloody hell! It took me months to be able to just take a slice of it. It's so
Yeah.
difficult to work with. And then everybody's talking about how they understand how all these brain cells work, and each one's as complex as a city. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, they don't. you know, but it frustrates me. I can't imagine how it must frustrate somebody who actually works in the field as a professional.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is always caveating what you're saying, and therefore understanding the limitations of your own knowledge.
Yeah,
And I think it's, to use not a pun, but is not to believe your hype.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
this morning, I've just given a talk to the National Long COVID Network about research that I'm doing on people who are suffering long COVID, having survived COVID itself, but are now experiencing long-term symptoms that they call a kind of brain fog, where they
yeah,
get confused, or they can't make decisions, concentrate, etc. And um, I was getting questions about, do you know what brain networks are involved? And I said, no, because I don't. And I said, and that's the truth. I can speculate,
yes,
but we're too early in our journey to do so. And I also said to them, and that's why I like working with people like you guys, clinicians who are at the coalface, because you've all got a different perspective, and each perspective is important. So one of the clinicians on this call, she's a dietitian and a nutritionist, and she knows the type of impacts that different types of foods will have. And if
yeah,
someone is overeating a particular thing because they're feeling lethargy, they might be missing out on certain other important things for their brain health.
hmm,
Um, then there's sleep. Sleep is really important for the brain. So another person was a sleep person.
right.
Then a physio, he told me that, I mean, he's weird because he's done 19 London marathons on the trot. I mean,
Right.
that to me requires, we should lock him up. But
Yeah.
um, so, and he's got long COVID himself, so
Right.
he noticed that there were certain things that he finds really difficult. He said he'd actually have to sometimes have to slow down in the shower and have a break while having a shower,
Really.
or when he was bending down to do his shoelaces or taking the stairs. And he realized, because he's a physio and he runs, he realized that there was a point at which his heart rate maybe was too much and he did. So they're
Wow.
doing work on people's heart rates. At what point do they get pushed into the long COVID kind of, I've gone too far over the edge, etc. And I said to him, this is exactly the kind of thing people like I need to work with, because
Yes.
the stuff that's happening here is the end of the process.
Yes.
After the eating, the sleep, all of that,
Hmm.
and no one answer or no one methodology is the correct one,
Yes.
because the brain is a complex system, and to
Mm.
try to suggest that we know something about it by just using one particular lens is just completely idiotic.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, the important thing is about honesty. and
Yes.
knowing the limitations of what you're trying to do. And as
Right.
long as you do that, you're not selling people a kind of a message which is incorrect.
So that leads me really nicely to I want to get into the nitty gritty now. I mean, what is your, or what was your writing process then? How did you create this new book? 2 years you said it took. How did you do it? How did you structure it? How did you come up with a structure?
Um, what I did was, first of all, I thought about all the major cognitive areas that needed to be covered, and
Right.
tried to parcelate them into the major disorders. And some of them are relatively freestanding. So object recognition, face recognition, memory, etc. Then there are some others where there's a gray area. Is that one area? Is it two areas, etc.? So I had
Right.
to create a kind of structure of what are the main areas that I think we can teach about. And
Mm,
I do emphasize main because there'll be more, but
mm,
right now we can only deal with a certain number. And I think
okay.
the publishers may have given me some guidance in terms of maximum length of the manuscript, uh,
Yes.
how many words per chapter they thought worked well. And that
Hmm.
kind of gave me a
That's
ballpark.
interesting.
8 chapters wouldn't be enough, certainly
Hmm.
for something about the brain.
Hmm.
15 would probably be too many. So those numbers gave me a steer towards what could work or not. And what I did with, let's say, those cognitive areas was that I thought, um, the brain processes information. So how do we process that information? First of all, we bring the information in, and we have to attend to it.
Hmm.
And that process of attention is really important. And we know that can break down in this bizarre condition called neglect, where people will, they can see it, but they'll ignore the left hand side of the world.
Mm,
So I thought, okay, the first thing is demonstrate that just because information is coming in doesn't mean that we're going to pay attention to it. So
okay.
neglect became the first chapter. Then the next one was, that we interact with the world, because I want to drink this cup of tea. So I need to understand this cup, and I need to base an action towards that cup. And that can go wrong, resulting in something called apraxia, or in a developmental perspective, it's dyspraxia, where children have coordination difficulties. Then the next thing is recognizing this cup of tea. Then the next thing is recognizing you as Scott rather than just another person. And then
Right.
bringing that information together, memory, remembering our last conversation. And then if we're going to plan a dinner together or going out together, that involves the front of the brain, which is the manager of the brain. And then how do we communicate with each other, which is language. So I effectively took it as an organism bringing in information, attending to it, and going through the series of steps that would allow you and I to interact with one another. Initially, it's just about me interacting with the world. Then
Hmm.
it's me interacting with objects, and then it's me interacting with you in a communication perspective.
Right.
So that's what I did there. And
Hmm.
I was going to do, uh, I thought I was going to do 2 introductory chapters. And at one point I got scared and thought, no, it's only going to be 1. And then I got a bit more comfortable and thought it's going to be 2. And then while I was writing the second chapter, I thought, no, it's 3. So I've actually got 3 introductory chapters, followed
Right.
by my different areas. And then I've added a chapter which no other book of this type has got, which is a chapter on rehabilitation.
All right. Okay. Okay. So did your introductory chapters, are they like at the macro level? Are you describing the macro situation? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first chapter is just a general introduction into what is this thing called neuropsychology? Where did it come from? Why do we even, give a damn about it, etc.? And what's it attempting to do? And also, what is it not attempting to do? So this is where I bring in neuroscience a bit. Then my second chapter, I called it a toolkit, because so much teaching is done without knowing anything about whether the students understand these things or not. And I think, well, never assume that they know that there are these different areas of the brain. why would they know what a stroke is compared to a hemorrhage, compared to epilepsy, etc.? So I
Yeah.
actually go through those things, not because we as cognitive neuropsychologists actually need to know that, because I can look at someone and study their face recognition, etc., without really needing to know what part of the brain it is. But I think for the student, so that they feel comfortable when they're reading things, so that they're not thinking, oh, I can't understand every fourth word. Just
Yeah.
give them a toolkit for understanding it, which allows them to take the information in more deeply. And I explain the process of actually testing a patient and why you test an individual, etc. And then the third introductory chapter is on methods and principles, because there are certain kind of scientific principles that we use when we're studying people with brain damage, which are rather different to standard cognitive psychology. And then I tackle issues such as whether to study one person in great depth, which we call single case studies, or groups. And then I tackle a thorny subject, which is whether neuropsychology should be dealing with people with developmental disorders like dyslexia, or only people with acquired disorders after some sort of brain insult. And
All right.
so, in a way, those my chapters 2 and 3, I'm probably more proud of than any other chapter, because I think those are my gift to students, in terms of you can find some of the other stuff in other books, but you won't find this stuff in another book.
Right. Okay. So before we jump further into that, what was your writing process? Did you write each chapter in a linear way, or did you do it as a holistic piece and just add bits, or how did you do it?
It's a good question. I think what I did was that when I got back into my writing, which weirdly happened because of COVID, as you know, but your audience might not know, I ended up giving quite a large series of free general talks online
Bit of
during
an
COVID.
expert.
It was just to share knowledge, and they became rather popular. The audience ranged from A-level school kids through to professionals working in the area but who didn't know these areas, through to just the general public. And that's, for me, getting that breadth is really important. And we were getting feedback from people in a formal way to work out whether they wanted more talks, etc., etc. And the resounding thing was that they wanted more talks. And one of the pieces of feedback was that they felt that I was able to take quite complex subjects and make them interesting and accessible. And
Yeah.
I thought, I think that's what a book is, isn't it? And then I remembered there was this book that I started writing 13 years before that was very much on the back burner, and maybe it should come to the front burner.
Yeah.
And so COVID, in a way, pushed me into this confidence that I hadn't had before. And then the lockdown allowed me the space, because working, full time, working 50, 60 hours a week doesn't give you space to write a book.
Yeah.
I was still working that hard, but because I wasn't having to travel to London, etc., it gave me the space. So what I ended up doing was, um, I think, start with the stuff that you know, which is going to give you confidence, so that
Yes.
you get something under your belt. Write the easy stuff first, and um, I started with the areas that I know best, the ones that I've lectured on many times to undergraduates, because ultimately it was taking an undergraduate lecture and turning it into a book chapter and adding stuff to it. And so I'd start with the undergraduate lecture, and I'd think, okay, what do I need to say here? But importantly, what was I not able to say in the lecture because I only had an hour or 2 hours or whatever? What more do I need to add here? Then I would create a story. And it's interesting that you like stories, because for my own students, I always say, what is the story you want to tell? The information is a separate thing, but what is the story? How do you want to start? What's your middle going to be? How are you going to end?
Yeah.
And so I would say, when things were going according to plan, I was still juggling my main work, but I was managing to find the time such that I was writing one chapter a month. And let's say the first 2 weeks would be my gathering information. So I would get all of the stuff that I knew, review chapters, recent articles, etc.
Yes.
And I'd kind of do a mind map of what are the things I want to say, and then importantly, what's that linear story going to be, so that it's not just and then there's this and then there's that, and then
Yeah.
the story to me was really important. And then I'd spend about a week to 10 days writing it, and then I'd put it to the side, or I'd give it to some of my research, my students to have a look at, or to the publishers, and then I'd just move on. And I tackled the most difficult chapter right at the end, because I knew that that was just going to be a take a deep breath and just hope for the best.
Right. Okay. And who is the target audience? Is it the undergraduate student, or is it, what are you aiming at?
So the initial target audience was, let's say, a third-year undergraduate audience and master's students, because neuropsychology is something that students tend to take in usually as an optional module, because it's not a core part of a psychology degree, but it's become more and more popular. It's usually something that's taken as a third-year optional module or a final-year optional module. But a lot of master's programs also teach neuropsychology. But importantly, there are a lot of people who've got a first degree in psychology who've never studied any neuropsychology, and some of them go on to become clinical psychologists.
Yes.
And then some of those people want to end up doing neuropsychology. So they have to then do a separate program after their doctorate, and it's just at a diploma level or a master's level. And so those people also need an introduction to the field. So it covers those groups. But because of my writing style, I start with no knowledge. So I don't do you should know this already. So in a way, it's not a popular science book, but anyone can read it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
my publishers said that they loved the fact that they didn't know anything about neuropsychology, and yet they were able to understand my chapters. And so
Right.
for me, although the main target audience is students, anyone can read it.
Right. Okay. I'll certainly be looking forward to reading it. I can't wait to read it. I'm excited about it. But
Good.
let's go into the motivations, and maybe if you could maybe choose 2 or 3 of the chapters that, you said some of them were really important to you, some of them were quite difficult.
Yeah.
What are you trying? What's the message? Say, let me just choose one random. The memory one. I know that's your favorite field. So
Yeah.
memory. What are you trying to do in that chapter for this student or member of the public who's interested in memory? What are you trying to do, Ashok?
Good question. I think that the first thing for the memory chapter in particular is to say that memory is way, 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 way more than what people think it is. So I actually start with the fact that memory can be affected by so many different things, like whether you're tired, whether you've got brain injury, whether you've got virus, etc., etc. So the fact that memory can be affected by many different things is important, because if I had a penny for every time someone told me they had a bad memory, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because I'd have retired a long time ago.
Yes.
Because everyone thinks they've got a bad memory. The
Yeah.
thing is that no one comes to me and says, Ashok, I've got an amazing memory. Everyone says they've got a bad memory. So
Yeah.
everyone's interested in memory. So the first thing is memory can be affected by so many things. The next thing is to give a sense of how complex memory is. So I start with saying, consider a couple of questions. What is a bicycle? When did you last ride a bicycle? How do you ride a bicycle? Now, all of those things require your experiences of a bicycle. Do they require one memory system about your bicycle information, or is it different types of information? And so I take that and I start slowly going through and demonstrating that these are different types of information. And then I take an extremely the most important patient ever studied, a young man called Henry Molaison, who had really severe epilepsy, and he was treated in in Montreal. And basically what they found is that he was having, I think, 7 grand mal seizures a day, and none of the drugs were touching the sides. And so he was in an awful state if they let him continue like that. And through experimental surgery, they'd found out that if you can find the focus of the epileptic seizure and remove that surgically, it's an invasive procedure, but at least you can stop the poor guy from having 5 to 7 grand mal seizures a day. So they did this surgery, and they were able to greatly reduce his epilepsy. The thing is that from that point in 1953 till he died about 55 years later, he didn't lay down another long-term memory.
Oh, dear.
So he could remember while we're chatting, he could remember, if I said apple, pear, tree, a minute later, he could remember apple, pear, tree. But by the end of the conversation, 3 minutes later, he wouldn't know what he'd seen, what he'd heard. And then if you said to him, can you remember yesterday we did this? He'd say, but we haven't met before.
Oh, right. It's really severe. Right.
Yeah, really severe. And I use that to say, okay, so this thing that we call memories, at least 2 things. One is that Henry could hold on to information for about a minute, but not for more than a minute. So there must be a cutoff point, and we call that short-term memory. Not what most people think short-term memory is the last few weeks. It's not. Short-term memory is basically the period of consciousness, what you can hold in your consciousness. Right. And then long-term memory is anything beyond that. So the start of our conversation is, or even just when you asked me about that chapter and the one that is already in long-term memory. Right. So I use that to kind of start teasing apart the different elements of memory, and then I dig deeper and deeper and deeper by looking at aspects of short-term memory and then aspects of long-term memory to eventually derive what I call a memory tree, to demonstrate that memory is all these different things, and that even that is still just a preliminary understanding, because as research goes on, we find out more and more. And then I end the chapter with the theories that we've got about how we bring this information together to give us a sense of who we are.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds, I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated by that. I think it would be lovely to understand it better. So that's our memory.
Yeah.
We then moved on to what you went to look at how that memory's accessed, or where did you go next? I'm trying to follow your logic.
You mean within that chapter?
Well, wherever in the book.
Oh, okay. Well, each of the chapters had a kind of different thing going on in terms of. Right. So face recognition is one of my favorite areas. So again, in that one, I look at this condition called prosopagnosia, which is a face recognition disorder.
Yes.
And I explore that by saying, okay, so what does that tell us about how you know that this is Ashok? And is that system of recognizing me as Ashok the same as the one that allows you to say that this is a tea mug?
Yeah.
And if it's different, what's different about it? And what does that tell us about the stages of face recognition and how it can break down? And the way that I describe cognitive neuropsychology is that many systems, like our memory system, work so efficiently that we have no idea how complex they are. Therefore, it's only a dysfunction that reveals the complexity. And so I gave you the example of Henry. What happened with him was this incredible kind of journey into the complexity of memory.
Yes.
So the first thing is that we get out of neuropsychology is that by studying people dysfunction, we get a window into normal, healthy function.
Yes.
So we understand ourselves better. Then, by developing better models of our functioning, when the next patient comes along, we're able to recognize, oh, this is like Henry, and therefore this patient has probably got this memory disorder.
Right.
So we're able to assess and diagnose future patients better because of our own understanding of ourselves. And then when a patient doesn't fit into that theory, that's where we have to expand the theory. So
Right.
that's number two. The third one is kind of like the holy grail, which is now that we understand ourselves better and we're getting to understand Henry's memory problem better, etc., is there anything we can do to help Henry? So that's
Right.
where rehab comes in. So wherever possible, I try to demonstrate those different layers, and it's possible in some areas but not in all of them. And so with the face recognition one, I start delving into different issues to do, showing how special faces are, how we know this, and a little bit about how this can break down in dementia.
Right. Very good. So let's move to the sort of the topics that I know a lot of the population on LinkedIn and, you know,
Yeah.
in the business world will immediately look for. You know, they'll look for, you know, things like, and this is, I'm getting into neurobiologics here, you know, neuro leadership, neuro coaching, neuro this, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Can you help? Is there a pill you can give me that's going to help me avoid all that crap?
The bullshit detector.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an easy pill. I think
Yeah.
just hearing a couple of their sentences, and if they can articulate what they mean is the neuro bit of it,
Mm-hmm.
rather than them just saying, oh, scientists have shown. And whenever someone says scientists have shown, that means I want you to imagine people in white coats, and that justifies what I'm just about to say.
Yes.
Now, if you said to me, scientists have shown that this COVID vaccine is going to, give you some immunization, I've got an image of people in white coats, and guess what?
Yeah.
We used to see them on the box during lockdown, and we
Yeah.
know that they were doing it.
Yeah.
There aren't scientists in white coats doing neuro coaching stuff, etc.
No.
And I think that it's that sleight of hand that concerns me. Now, the thing is that I actually put this on Facebook the other day, and someone said, "Oh, but there are some really important people at this particular conference," and that doesn't mean that all of it is rubbish, because there will be something somewhere.
Of course.
But that doesn't legitimize everything. And my concern is that people will blindly follow a particular methodology, which is okay sometimes. The problem for me is, well, there are a couple of different things. One is, it seems that if you put the word neuro before something, you can treble your fee. So there's basically parting people with their money.
Yes.
The second is, if you're just talking rubbish, you're wasting someone's time.
Yeah.
Now, some of those people are fools and should be separated from their money, but there'll be other people who should be getting different types of help. Now, I don't know the neuro business or neuro coaching world that well, but a parallel example, it's not a great one, but a parallel one, is that, for example, some young people who keep walking past their friends, don't say hello to people, etc., they can get misdiagnosed as having autism. Now, if you think they've got autism, you try out the various packages or treatment programs, etc., to try to help them with those difficulties. But the thing is that some of those people don't have autism. They've got prosopagnosia. They can't recognize faces, and that's why they walk past their friends. They don't smile at them, etc. Now, if you've decided that they've got autism, you're not going to be giving them the appropriate support that they need. You're giving them the wrong support. I don't know how that would apply in a neuro coaching or neuro business or whatever world, but there's one thing, which is the parting fools with their money. But the other thing is that if this person actually needs help, they might just need some other type of leadership coaching or whatever, not neuro coaching.
Yes, it is an interesting one, because I used to, if I'm honest, I used to get quite cross about a lot of it. And I still do. I mean, I haven't quite got over that yet, but I've seen so many times, like people who go on a 2-week course on NLP and come out saying that they're therapists, and it's just nonsense. And it doesn't matter how articulate they are at spewing the nonsense; it's nonsense. And I mean, I've had abuse, and one of my friends has actually got taken to court because he said it's nonsense. This is just not right, and he won his court case. Of course, he won his court case, but it's almost like a disease. You know, it's a neuro disease, but I'm not using neuro in the sense that you would use neuro. And it's a really difficult one, Ashok. It's a really difficult one.
I imagine that there's a couple of different things going on. One of them is charlatanism, where people actually do believe they're hype. Or no, they actually know that there's not much to it, but they know that this is an easy way to make money.
Yeah.
The other is people who are desperate for an answer.
Yeah.
And you know, if someone's been suffering from depression and they've tried a number of different things, if someone offers them a new way that they haven't tried, they're going to go for that.
Yes, of course.
So at some level, part of it is to feed a hunger. But the problem with that is that can be exploited, and there can be a placebo effect where someone thinks that it's working, but it's not. It's because of their desire for it to work that's happening. But then what happens is that these people then say how great that neuro whatever thing was. Now, ultimately, given the conversation we're having, of course, there's a neuro element to everything we're doing.
Of course,
there's a neuro element to our conversation because of what I've just said to you before. That you take in information, you're hearing it, you process it, your memory does this, your frontal lobes do that. So there's a neuro element to everything. But whether I don't think we are going to get to that point where using these words in this particular way is going to make you a better coach, or make better business decisions, etc. But of course, there is a reality to it, like Kahneman and Tversky, who won the Nobel Prize. That was about two systems of making decisions, and guess where they happen? In the brain at a neuro level. So in terms of a neuro aspect to making decisions that make you rich, yes, but not to the level where you can go to a 2-week course and know it.
No,
I mean, they didn't win the Nobel Prize for doing something that in a couple of weeks.
No, they did not. They did not. And I mean, I heard an interview recently with them, with Sam Harris, and basically a lot of what they said in that book they've said now is no longer extant. You know, and of course that's the scientific process, but and doesn't mean the book's wrong. It just means it was right when it was written.
That's a really interesting and important point, Scott, because I say to students, when I was talking about memory and Henry with holding on to information for 1 minute and then not being able to hold it for much longer, there's a model that was developed in, I think, 1968 called the modal or multi-store model of memory, which we teach our students sometimes at A level and otherwise at university. When they get up to the third year, certainly for my module, but sometimes even the first year, I tell them what are the problems with that model. And I explain to them why that model is not sufficient. But I say to them, that doesn't mean that you therefore say they were idiots. You see it as a historical process that we got to where we've got to, with them coming up with what was the best model of memory at the time. And then what that does is it gives other researchers something to look at, because in the scientific process, we replicate what other people have done, and then we try to extend it and say, okay, so well done, Atkinson and Schifrin, your model is really good for this, this, and this. And then I've tried it out with this, and I've seen that it doesn't work. So let's see how we can develop it further. I say to students, it's not that they were wrong. They were right at the time.
Absolutely.
And we've built what we've got today in terms of memory understanding from them. So Kahneman and Tversky saying, what we wrote then, well, now we know it's way more complex. That just shows the scientific process, as you say. I think when people don't understand that, they're just, well, I won't.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, Newtonian physics got us to the moon, and the half wing got us to eagles. You know,
Yep.
there is a progression. There's a
Yeah.
mighty storm just started outside my window here. I don't know if you can hear it on there, but it's really loud. And this
No,
microphone may be
I've
filtering it
got
out.
nice blue skies here. We
Oh,
had
it's
that last night.
really. We had thunder and lightning this morning as well. So we're coming towards the end,
Yeah.
and I want you to, if you can, give me your sort of. This is a hard question, Ashok, and you do what you like with it. But what are your three big takeaways? What do you want folk to say? Well, you talked about Kahneman. You know, it was about system 1, system 2. That was it, right? That was the summary of the book, really. Yeah. What are the three things that you would love people to have read your book and go, right? What are they?
Ooh.
Hard question.
I think the first one would be that the methodology, because I always talk about cognitive neuropsychology as a methodology.
Yes.
It's not a field; it's just a way of looking at human behavior. So that methodology of looking at a dysfunctional system and trying to work out what we can get out of that,
Right.
because you can actually apply that to things outside neuropsychology as well. So just seeing that when you see someone who can't do something, how can we understand what that tells us about that person?
Yeah.
I guess a bigger, more general issue is effectively taking us back to me as a 19 or 20-year-old, is that people with brain damage aren't vegetables in hospital beds. They have certain difficulties, but often they can do a lot of other things. And
Yes.
that for us, that for me, the process is to help students understand the strengths and weaknesses of patients, and contrast that to demonstrate the complexity. So I think getting that, and then finally, what I try to demonstrate in the book is that the brain works in concert.
Right.
When I am trying to make a cup of tea or whatever, there'll have been a desire that started somewhere in my brain. Then there'll have been an action to do something. There'll have been me visually attending to information. There's visual recognition, etc., etc. So none of this is separate. Oh, there's the memory bit. There's the face recognition bit. Some of them can work. Some of the bits can work separately, but generally speaking, it works together. And I think understanding that we're part of systems
Yes.
rather than individual is really important, because I think taking that and seeing that you can't break down any complex system into just these bite-sized separable processes, that
Yes.
my behavior even at the brain level is complex, and then my behavior as an individual is complex, because there's what I was feeling before I met you, before this conversation. What are my motivations for later on, whether I rush this or not? If I'm feeling negative today, there are all these things that we only we only notice because of what's coming out of our mouth, or it's some information from here. There's
Yes.
so much complexity back here, and trying to appreciate that what you see on the surface in someone's behavior is just a veneer, and appreciating that whenever you look at someone else. From the work that I'm doing, it's about the brain level, but when you look at someone who's got mental health difficulties, or let's say an addiction problem, or whatever, not simplifying it to just that behavior, but the fact that there are complex systems going on behind. So I hope that people get that message.
Very good. Very good. That's a terrific message. So can I ask a cheeky question now? And I don't know if it's in your book, but should we be doing the Elon Musk thing of connecting our minds to directly to the metaverse or the cloud, or what do you think about that? Brain
It's about
interfacing.
it's about my pay grade and knowledge base, but my instinctive answer is no.
Yeah.
Don't do stuff until you understand it.
Yes, there was an article published by a Chinese research group last week where they've they think they've found, and it's only one study, so it's not, it's just an idea really, but they think they've found basically a protein network that they can use to create the bridge. I'm very skeptical, but so people are working on it. There's a lot of money going into it. So,
and the thing is that research is needed, and all of that. I think it's fantastic. And I don't know if your viewers would know, but just like there's the Human Genome Project to map the human genome, now there's the Human Connectome Project to try to understand how the brain works, etc. So all of these things, I think eventually we will have answers to those.
Yes.
It's when we will have answers to those that is an important point. And in my very first lockdown talk, which I call "Why Do We Know Less About the Human Brain Than the Dark Side of the Moon," I finish with a picture of a baby crawling in the dark, because that's where we are. We don't only use 10% of the brain. We understand about 7% of the brain. So there's all this still to learn. And so I'm not saying that we're not going to get there. It's just a case of just being careful about not letting people think that we've got somewhere that we haven't. And in my neurobolics talk, I actually talk about a brain training system in the States, where the company they got sued, and they had to pay a huge amount because effectively the FDA regulatory authority in the States decided that there wasn't any evidence for what they were suggesting. And the problem with this is that they were giving people false hope about how to help their elderly parents, which I think is abusive. And so it's when people do that that it gets me pissed off. We will one day be able to do it, but we can't yet.
Yes, it's a bit of a shame, really, that people can't reframe it as the wonderful thing that it is, because it always, I think people, well, this is slightly off piece, but one of the characteristics that turns me off is certainty. If somebody is certain of anything, I don't think they know what they're talking about. I'm like, no. But the other thing, the turning it, it's quite Carl Sagan-ish, this really, but turning it and saying just what Ashok's just said, we understand I think it's probably less than that, actually. I think you've been enthusiastic there, Ashok. But we understand 7%. We've been at it for 200 years and we only understand 7%. That's fantastic. And that really is interesting. That really turns me on. It's like, wow.
And for my students, I actually say we're really lucky because we're not working in a really crowded field where they know so much already that for us to find out something new, it's going to take a long time. As long as we use good methodology, as long as we're careful and caveat what we find, each thing we do is adding. So one of the comments that I got this morning from the people who'd invited me for the Long COVID Network was, it's so nice to see objective results for what our patients are subjectively complaining about. So even that is a step in the right direction, that the doctors and the patients know that there's an issue, but there isn't anything to objectively demonstrate it. So they don't know how to quantify it, how to help the patient, etc. But when you can see it in an objective sense, then you can at least say, okay, so what you were saying, we've got good evidence for that. So now what can we do to help you manage that? We might not be able to bring it back, but how can we manage it? But even this is a first pass at it. But for me, just doing that good science, and honestly, on Saturday when I analyzed the data, I was so excited. I haven't been that excited for ages because we've done this study in a small breadth of time. Like in 6 weeks, my amazing student has tested 30 people with long COVID and we've got these beautiful results. I don't think I'll ever publish it. Well, we want to publish it, but I don't think from start to getting something published, it'll ever have been that quick. But it's because we were just careful with it. And of course, there's that unknown, which is, whether it'll work or not, but it has in this case. But it was because of using good methodology and just being careful. And if someone asks me a question about, oh, do you think this means this, this, and this? I'll say, no. Rather than, oh, I'll follow my cheeky no with, because I don't want to sell a story that I don't believe in.
Yes. Dr. Ashok Jansari, that has been absolutely fantastic. Do you know, I'm a junkie. I'm a wonder junkie, and that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for spending some time
Oh,
chatting to me about
thank
your book.
you. It takes two to tango. Remember, I mean, unless you ask the right questions, there's not much for me to say. So it takes two to tango.
Let's talk again very soon.
I hope so. Take care.
Take care. Well done. Excellent. That was a good chat, mate.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that was an hour.
Oh, was it? Okay, great.
Yeah, 59 minutes and 30 seconds. There you go.
Oh, that's pretty close. Yeah.
Bang on an hour. We could have got on for ages. That was fantastic. Well done. That was excellent. I really, really wish you all the best with Ashok, man. It's brilliant.
Thank you very much.
And
Do you want me to send you anything? You've got my YouTube info.
Yeah, you could send me. I mean, if you send me anything you want me to put in the video, like if there's an image you want me to use, or a picture of your book would be good if you've got a decent picture of the front cover. And what else? There isn't a chapter available. There isn't a chapter available for people to get a sneaky look, is there?
No, because even I don't get a copy of it until the.
Some publishers do that. They give you one chapter to distribute, but
yeah,
but no, that's great. And I'll edit it probably this evening. So I'll get a copy over to you, and then we can decide when you want to broadcast it.
Brilliant.
I'll get it broadcast for you.
I'll send over some stuff to you. Okay.
Okay, brilliant, Ashok. Thank you very much, mate.
I told you about the party on the 8th. If you can't make it, that's fine. I will be getting in touch with Jilly at some point for my autumn visit to Little Compton, and so we'll see each other before the year is out, I hope.
Fantastic. I really look forward to seeing you. Can't wait.
Okay.
Cheers, Ashok.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.